There is a sound that Keithy traffic overseers are trained from their very first cycle of service to never stop hearing. It is not an explosion. It is not the shriek of a hull breach alarm or the grinding bass note of a reactor going critical. It is quieter than all of those. It is the sound of a frequency going silent when it was not supposed to go silent. 27 years behind the console, and still, when I hear that silence, something ancient and vestigial in my plating pulls tight. My scales, which my commanding officer once described as constitutionally incapable of subtlety, go the flat grey of deep ocean silt. They did that the morning the vessel Orindal stopped transmitting. I am Veth Saran, and I have been a fleet traffic overseer for the Kethi Orbital Authority for 27 years, 4 months, and 11 days. I have managed the approach vectors of 11,000 vessels. I have coordinated evacuations of 3 stations and 1 asteroid colony. I have filed more incident reports than I have taken meals, which my physician informs me is a statistic I should examine more carefully. I had seen everything. That is what I told the young ones. I told them with the quiet authority of a creature who had watched entire solar systems industrialized and decommissioned in a single career. I told them there was no crisis that could not be managed with proper protocol, clear communication, and a correctly filed Form 7 TAV. I was wrong about a great many things that day. I am comfortable admitting this now. I am less comfortable with how I learned it. The Orindal was a Preth colonial education vessel. If you are unfamiliar with the Preth, imagine a species that decided, several thousand years before contact with the wider galaxy, that the highest form of civilization was to document it. They are compact beings, roughly half the height of a Kethi, with 4 wide amber eyes set in a face that always appears to be quietly judging the quality of your record-keeping. They have 4 arms, move in precise measured steps, and consider spontaneous emotional display to be roughly equivalent to a sanitation malfunction. Their children, I have always thought, look exactly like their adults but with larger eyes and slightly more readable expressions of disapproval. The Orindal carried 41 of those children. It was a field excursion vessel, one of a dozen the Preth Academic Authority operated in the system, taking students to observe the gas giant Velnorath from close orbital range. Velnorath is magnificent. I have lived in this system for my entire career, and it still arrests me sometimes. The way it hangs in the feed screens like something a god left behind and forgot to collect. The Orindal had passed through my assigned corridor at 0614 system time, inbound on a standard observation arc. I had cleared them myself. The vessel master, a senior Preth academic named Coordinator Des, had filed impeccable approach documentation. I remember thinking as I signed the clearance that the Preth were very restful to work with, administratively speaking. At 0947, the Orindal stopped transmitting. At 0948, my junior overseer, Len Yu, who was 11 months into his posting and still made small distress sounds when something deviated from the daily projection, leaned across his station and said, in a voice he was trying very hard to keep professional, "Senior Overseer, the Orindal." "I see it," I said. "Their transponder has ceased." "I see that. And their course correction thrusters have also ceased." "Yes. And," Len Yu continued, his bioluminescent crest doing something involuntary and alarmed above his head, "they are now on a passive drift trajectory that will take them into the upper crush layer of Velnorath in approximately 4 hours and 19 minutes. 4 hours and 19 minutes. I want you to hold that number because it is about to change. It always does. The numbers always get worse before anything gets better." I had already pulled up the Orindal's manifest. 41 Preth children, age cohorts 8 through 12, 1 vessel master, 2 academic supervisors, 1 ship's physician, 1 maintenance officer, 46 souls. I opened the emergency frequency. Nothing. I opened the academic authority's emergency relay. Nothing. I routed an automated distress ping through the Preth Diplomatic Communications Bureau, which required filling out a Form 12-Sev provisional, which I did in under 90 seconds, a personal record I take no satisfaction in. Nothing. Senior Overseer, Len Yu said. The vessel shows no visible damage from external scan, no debris field, no thermal event signature. Which meant the Orindol had not been destroyed. Something had simply failed. Perhaps the communication array. Perhaps a cascade through the primary systems. Perhaps something in the vessel's electrical grid had gone quietly and catastrophically wrong, the way things do when they do not want to be noticed failing. The children were alive. They were simply adrift, without navigation, without propulsion correction, and without any means of calling for help that I could reach. And Velnarath was patient, as gas giants always are. It did not need to hurry. The crush layer would be there whenever the Orindal arrived. Within 40 minutes, I had put out the distress call on every commercial, military, and independent frequency in the system. I had contacted the Kethi Emergency Response Division, who informed me their nearest vessel was 5 hours and 40 minutes from intercept position. I had contacted the Preth Academic Authority, who responded by sending me a form requesting confirmation of the vessel registration number, which I provided, and then a second form requesting confirmation of the first form, which I did not provide because I was busy doing everything else. The next 2 hours were agony. The Kurd vessel, the Stormbreaker, pushed its drives to emergency threshold. 3 hours, 20 minutes. Still too late. 2 independent cargo haulers in the system declined the distress call. 1 cited drive maintenance. 1 cited, and I am quoting directly from the filed response, prior contractual obligations that preclude navigational deviation. I have the name of that company. I will always have the name of that company. A Preth diplomatic courier, which theoretically had the speed to make intercept, received my emergency relay and responded that, as a diplomatic vessel, it was not equipped for rescue operations and that engaging in such operations without prior authorization from the Preth Diplomatic Committee would constitute a violation of the Treaty of Orbital Non-Interference, Clause 7, Subsection 4b. It offered to file an emergency petition on my behalf. Standard processing time, the message informed me cheerfully, was 4 to 6 standard days, 3 hours and 9 minutes to crush layer entry. Len U had stopped making small, distressed sounds. This, I had learned, was actually worse. It meant he had moved past distress into the quiet territory beyond it. His crest luminescence had gone almost entirely dark. Veth Saran, he said quietly, which was also wrong, because in 11 months he had never dropped my honorific. There are no other vessels. And that was when the emergency channel produced a voice I was not expecting. Yeah, hi, Oduya here. Mara Oduya, Atmospheric Calibration Services, currently running contract on Station Velnarath 7. I'm picking up the distress call. What's the situation? I pulled up the registration on the transmitting vessel before I responded. It was a reflex. After 27 years, you do not begin a conversation without knowing who you are talking to. The vessel was called the Sonda. It was a Class 3 atmospheric entry calibration shuttle, which is the kind of vessel that sounds functional when you describe it that way and looks, on my display, like someone had designed a very small, very tired ship for doing precise and unglamorous work inside the upper atmospheric layers of gas giants. It had an entry heat shield rated for pressure dive operations. It had calibration sensor arrays bolted to the nose in a configuration I recognized from the Atmospheric Science Division. It had, according to the registration data, been modified extensively by its current owner in ways that the licensing authority had noted several times without resolution. Its pilot held a Class 3 operating license, an atmospheric entry certification for Velnarath specifically, and this I noticed because I have a thorough eye, 3 prior citations for unlicensed velocity exceedance in the upper atmosphere of Velnarath. She had paid the fines, she had filed the appeals, she had lost the appeals, paid the remaining fines, and apparently continued her work. She was human. I noted this. I noted it the way I noted things that required additional mental preparation. Humans had been part of the galactic community for just over 90 standard years. They were small, they were fragile, they were inconsistent in a way that defied comfortable categorization, and they had a cultural relationship with danger that the Kethi psychological literature described in terms that I found increasingly inadequate, as either pathological or adaptive, depending on which study you read. The species had a saying. I had heard it repeated by the humans who passed through my traffic corridors, always with a certain tone that suggested it was meant to be reassuring and was not. We'll figure it out. Ms. Oduya, I said very carefully, this is Senior Overseer Veth Saran of the Kethi Orbital Authority. The distress call concerns a Preth educational vessel, the Orindal, currently on passive drift toward Velnarath crush layer entry. 46 souls aboard, 41 of them children. All communications and propulsion correction systems appear to have failed. Cured response is 3 hours and 4 minutes from intercept. Current time to crush layer is approximately 2 hours and 57 minutes. A pause on the frequency. A short one. So that's a no-go on Kurd making it, she said. Correct. And there's nobody else in range. We have no other respondents at this time. Another pause, shorter. Okay. I'm going to need you to give me the Orindal's current coordinates and drift vector, and I'm going to need you to pull whatever atmospheric current data you have for the upper Velnarath zone between their entry point and the layer below. I'm already moving. I processed this for a moment longer than I should have. Ms. Oduya, the Orindal will reach crush layer entry in under 3 hours. An intercept, attachment to the hull, and tow maneuver at that proximity to Velnarath's gravity well would require. I looked at the calculations Len Yu had run and rechecked, because the numbers did not seem real. Trajectory adjustments that exceed the safety thresholds of any Class 3 vessel by a considerable margin. The atmospheric currents in the upper Velnarath zone are unpredictable at this depth. This would be, I paused because I wanted to be precise, extremely dangerous. Yeah, she said. Her voice was very calm. It was the kind of calm that takes practice. I heard that part. There was a regulation. There is always a regulation, in my experience. The relevant one here was Kethi Emergency Protocol 14G, which states that in a declared emergency scenario where a civilian vessel has voluntarily responded to a distress call, the overseeing traffic authority is required to provide all relevant navigational, atmospheric, and telemetry data to the responding pilot, while simultaneously documenting that the responding pilot was fully informed of all risks and accepted them voluntarily. I had filed Protocol 14G documents 61 times in my career. Most of them were formalities, a hauler helping another hauler with a docking alignment, a courier relaying a medical supply package to a stranded research team. I had never filed one that felt like this. Transmitting coordinates and atmospheric current data now, I said. Ms. Oduya, for the official record, you have been informed that this maneuver presents extreme risk to your vessel and your life. Do you accept these risks voluntarily? Veth, she said. And she said my name the way humans say names, just the important part, stripped of formality, like it was a thing between people rather than a title. I grew up doing pressure dives in Jupiter's upper atmosphere for fun. I've been running calibration contracts inside Velnarath for 6 years. I know what she feels like when she's angry and when she's just bored. A small sound, not quite a laugh. Send me the kid count by age cohort 2, would you? I want to know what we're working with. I sent the data. Len Yu was staring at me. His crest had re-illuminated just slightly with the unsteady glow of something not yet sure how to feel. Is she? He started. She is moving, I said. But the calculations. I know. Veth Saran. The safety threshold exceedance alone. I know, Len Yu. He was quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, he said, "What else are they capable of?" I did not answer him. I did not have an answer. I had coordinates and atmospheric data and a countdown and a human pilot who had just said yes to something that my best projections told me she should not survive. I watched the sonda's beacon accelerate toward Velnorath, and I kept my channel open and I waited. The sonda was fast. I want to be precise about this because fast is a word that loses meaning when applied without context. I have tracked vessels in emergency thrust for 27 years. I know what fast looks like on a trajectory display. I know the difference between a vessel pushing its rated limits and a vessel that has been modified, quietly and repeatedly, by someone who understood exactly what they were doing and did not particularly care what the licensing authority thought about it. The sonda was not pushing its rated limits. The sonda appeared to have a complicated personal relationship with the concept of rated limits. "Len Yu," I said, "verify her velocity reading." Len Yu checked. He checked again. His crest went a color I did not have a name for. "It is correct," he said. "She is exceeding her Class 3 certification ceiling." "Yes." "By how much?" A pause. 31%. I had 3 prior citations in her file for unlicensed velocity exceedance. I had thought, when I first read that detail, that it was the record of someone careless. I understood now that it was the record of someone who had done this math many times before and knew exactly where the line was and why she was choosing to be on the other side of it. The sonda crossed the outer atmospheric boundary of Velnorath at a speed that should have required a Class 5 entry certification. "Oduya," I said on the open channel, "you are entering Velnorath's upper atmosphere." She said. There was a sound in the background. I identified it after a moment as music. She was playing music. "Your entry angle is steeper than recommended for Class 3 operations." "Steeper is faster," she said. "The current data you sent me shows a counter-rotation band at 42 kilometers depth. If I can hit that band on the right side, it'll slingshot me toward the Orindal's position instead of fighting the primary rotation. Save about 19 minutes. I looked at the atmospheric current map I had sent her. I had looked at that map for 2 hours. I had not seen what she had seen in it. Len Yu had pulled it up on his secondary display. I watched his eyes trace the counter-rotation band she was describing. I watched his expression shift. "She is correct," he said softly. "I did not see that." Neither had I. This is not a comfortable thing to admit. I have an atmospheric dynamic certification that I renewed last cycle. I had been looking at that map and seeing an obstacle. She had been looking at it and seeing a road. 2 hours and 21 minutes to crush layer entry. The next 17 minutes were, from a communication standpoint, almost silent. Mara Oduya did not narrate her descent. She did not provide updates unless I asked for them. The channel was open and I could hear her environment, the low structural vibration of a hull under atmospheric pressure, the occasional soft percussion of course corrections, the music, which I later identified as a style particular to certain human cultural traditions and which I found in context deeply strange to listen to. She was descending into a gas giant's upper atmosphere to intercept a drifting vessel, and she was listening to music that sounded like it belonged at a slow, pleasant gathering of friends. "Patch," she said suddenly, not to me, and I realized she was talking to her ship, which she had apparently named. Or the name was a shorthand for something, a nickname. Humans do this. They name their vessels with the same casual intimacy they extend to people, which is either charming or unsettling depending on your cultural framework. "Come on. Left shoulder, not the hip. There you go." Manual corrections. She was flying manually inside a gas giant's upper atmosphere. "Ms. Oduya," I said carefully, "your autopilot systems, Autopilot doesn't know Velnarath, she said. I do. I had no response to this that would have been useful. At 17 minutes after entry, she found the counter-rotation band. I watched her velocity vector on my display shift, catch, and accelerate with the smooth efficiency of something that had always been there waiting to be used. 19 minutes saved. Her projection put her at the Orindal in 41 minutes. Len U made a sound that was not a word. 1 hour and 43 minutes to crush layer entry. The Orindal was visible now on the long-range atmospheric scan, a pale shape against Velnarath's amber bronze cloud layers, drifting with the slow, patient indifference of a vessel that had given up on being a vessel. From a certain angle, in a certain light, it was almost beautiful. I am told that is often true of things that are about to be destroyed. I have visual on the Orindal, Mara said. Her voice had changed very slightly. Not afraid, more focused. She's listing about 12 degrees portside. That's consistent with a primary power loss on the port system array. Probably a cascade fault. I've seen it before on Preth academic vessels. They run the entertainment grid and the life support bus off the same secondary trunk, and when one goes, it takes everything. Can you restore their power remotely? No. But I can attach and give them thrust correction. That's enough if I do it right. A pause. I'm going to need about 4 minutes of precise station keeping while I hard dock. The atmospheric currents at this depth are, another pause, a specific kind of pause, enthusiastic. Enthusiastic, the atmospheric currents of a gas giant. She called them enthusiastic. Understood, I said. Is there anything we can provide from this position? Keep the channel clear. And Veth, I mean it, clear it completely. I need to be able to hear the ship. I cleared the emergency channel of all non-essential traffic. I flagged 3 commercial vessels that had been transmitting queries and suspended their access. I would receive formal complaints about this later. I did not care about the formal complaints. What followed defied explanation. I have reviewed the telemetry data from that 41-minute approach more times than I will admit. I have shared it with the Kethi Atmospheric Navigation Institute, who have since incorporated a version of it into their advanced certification curriculum under the heading Case Study, Non-Standard Approach Utilization under Emergency Conditions. The lead instructor told me, when she reviewed the raw data, that the counter-rotation band maneuver alone was worth 3 lecture sessions. She asked me if the pilot was available to speak to their students. I told her I would ask. I already knew what the answer would be. Mara Oduya reached the Orindal with 47 minutes remaining before crush layer entry. Hard docking at that atmospheric depth, at that proximity to Velnarath's gravitational gradient, with currents that were doing things my sensors were struggling to categorize in real time, required holding her vessel in stable relative position to a drifting unpowered hull for 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Short sentences now because there is no other way to write what I watched. She matched the Orindal's drift. She compensated for the portside list. A current shear hit both vessels. Her correction came before my sensors had finished registering the shear. She corrected again. The sonder held. Another shear. Bigger. She corrected before I could call it out. Len Yu grabbed my arm. He did not appear to notice he had done it. The docking clamps engaged. Solid contact. 1 hour and 3 minutes to crush layer entry. Hard dock confirmed, she said, and her voice was steady, which I found both reassuring and somehow more alarming than if she had sounded shaken. Initiating hull communication. If anybody's alive in there, they're about to feel a knock. I watched the telemetry as she brought the sonder's thrust online against the combined mass of both vessels. The Orindal was significantly larger than the sonder. The physics of this were not comfortable. She was a small vessel attempting to redirect a much larger drifting mass inside a gas giant's atmosphere against a gravitational gradient that did not want to let go. The combined vessel drift slowed, then stopped. Then, degree by degree, the trajectory began to change. Lenu's grip on my arm tightened. His crest was blazing now, gold-white, the color Keithy go when something has struck them with a force they did not expect and cannot immediately name. "She is doing it," he whispered. "Yes." "How is she doing that?" I had the Sonder's engine output data on my secondary screen. The answer was that she was running her drives at a level that should have been stripping the thermal buffers. The answer was that she had clearly done things to those drives that the Class 3 certification assumed were not possible. The answer was that she had grown up in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant doing this for sport, and she had spent 6 years learning this specific gas giant, and she had looked at our atmospheric current data and seen something none of us had seen, and she had descended manually because she knew the ship better than any autopilot did. That was the answer, and it was a complete answer, and it explained everything, and it still felt like watching something that should not be possible. 41 minutes to crush layer entry. The combined trajectory had changed. Not enough. Not yet. "Oduya," I said, "your current trajectory still intersects the crush layer boundary." "I know," she said, and there was something in the way she said it that made me stop asking for a moment. "The Orindal is heavier than the manifest says. Lot heavier. She's got research equipment aboard that isn't in the filed documentation. Typical." A brief exhale. "I need to go inside. The hard dock allows for crew transfer." "Emergency access hatch, yeah. I need to get to their propulsion relay. If I can manually jump the secondary bus, it might restore partial thruster authority to the Orindal. That and my thrust together should be enough to get us clear. Maybe." A pause. "Probably. The risk of separating from your vessel controls at this depth is significant, yes, I'm aware." A sound like a latch being turned. "Leaving patch on auto-maintain. She's good for about 20 minutes before the currents become a real problem. I'll be back in 12. She went inside. This is the part of the account I have the most difficulty writing with the kind of measured procedural accuracy that 27 years of incident reports have trained into me. Because what I am about to describe was not captured on any sensor feed. I have no telemetry for it. I have only the account of the Orindal's ship physician, Dr. Wess, who was the first adult member of the Preth crew to respond when the emergency access hatch opened. Dr. Wess is a small creature even by Preth standards, with the careful amber eyes and the measured manner of her species, and when I interviewed her afterward for my incident report, she sat very still and recounted what she had seen with the precision of someone who has decided that the only way to process a thing is to describe it exactly. She told me that the emergency hatch opened and a human entered, which she had not been expecting, and that the human was wearing an atmospheric entry suit that had been repaired in at least 4 places that she could see, and that the human looked around the dim interior of the Orindal with the calm, assessing expression of someone who had walked into worse situations and was running a quick mental comparison. The children, Dr. West told me, had been gathered in the main observation lounge because it was the most structurally reinforced compartment and because the academic supervisors had made the correct call to consolidate everyone in one place. They had been there for over 2 hours. The emergency lighting was on, the entertainment systems were off. It was very quiet except for the sounds the ship made as it drifted and the sound of some of the children crying in the controlled, private way that children cry when they are trying to be brave. Mara Oduya had 32 minutes. 12 of them she had allocated for herself inside the vessel. She did not go directly to the propulsion relay. She went to the observation lounge first. Dr. West told me that the human stood in the doorway of the observation lounge for approximately 3 seconds. She told me that in those 3 seconds, she watched the human's eyes move across every child in the room with the quick, cataloging focus of someone counting and assessing at the same time. She told me the human's expression did not show fear, which Dr. West said she found strange, because she herself had been afraid for 2 hours and 12 minutes and she was a trained medical professional with 30 years of experience. And she had expected that a stranger entering a drifting vessel inside a gas giant's atmosphere would show at least some acknowledgement of the situation. Instead, Dr. West told me the human smiled. Not a large smile. Not a performing smile. The small, specific smile of someone who has found what they were looking for and is quietly relieved about it. "Hey," Mara Oduya said to 41 Preth children in a dim and drifting vessel. "Sorry it took me a minute. Traffic was bad." Dr. West said that 2 children laughed. She said this with a kind of wonder in her voice, the way you describe something you watched happen and still are not entirely sure how it did. "I was not there for this. I want to be clear about that. I am reconstructing it from Dr. West's account and from the partial audio that was recovered from the Orindal's emergency recorder after the fact. What I know of the next 4 minutes comes from those sources, and I have tried to render it as accurately as I can. Because I think it matters. I think it matters more than the trajectory data. I think it matters more than the drive output numbers. I think it is, in the end, the actual story." Mara moved through the lounge quickly, touching shoulders as she went, not stopping. Just contact, brief and deliberate. Checking. She was looking for injuries, Dr. West realized. She was doing triage while she walked. In the far corner, separated slightly from the main group, was a child who was not crying. Dr. West told me that this child, whose name was Sev, was 8 years old, and had been on this field trip specifically because Sev's academic record indicated an exceptional aptitude for atmospheric science, and coordinator Des had personally selected Sev for the advanced cohort. She told me that Sev had not cried at any point in the 2 hours and 12 minutes, and that this had concerned her more than the children who had, because Sev had been sitting in the corner holding the strap of a small equipment bag with both hands and staring at the observation port and the amber clouds of Velnorath beyond it, with an expression that Dr. West described as too still. Mara reached Sev. She did not crouch down to the child's level in the condescending way of adults who want to seem approachable. She simply sat down on the deck beside the child, back against the bulkhead, and looked out the observation port at the same thing Sev was looking at. Velnorath, vast and amber and indifferent, filling the port from edge to edge. "Pretty, right?" Mara said. Not a question. Sev looked at her. The large amber eyes of a Preth child are, I am told, even more readable than those of Preth adults, which means they are readable by the standards of most of the galaxy. Dr. West said Sev looked at the human with an expression that contained equal parts suspicion, assessment, and something underneath those 2 things that was not yet hope, but was in the neighborhood. "You are the rescue," Sev said. Statement, not question. Preth children are very direct. "Working on it," Mara said. "You are very small for a rescue." "I get that a lot." Mara was looking at the observation port again. "You know what that darker band is, about 60 kilometers down? The color shift, the brownish one." Sev looked. A pause. "Ammonium hydrosulfide cloud layer," Sev said, with the automatic precision of a child who has done the reading. "It produces the color variation through differential light absorption at the relevant atmospheric pressure." "That's exactly right," Mara said, and she said it without the exaggerated enthusiasm adults use when they are surprised a child knows something. She said it the way you say something is right when it simply is. "I fly through that layer sometimes. For work, it smells terrible." Sev's eyes moved to her face. "You fly inside Velnorath." "That's what I do, yeah." A silence. The ship moved around them, the gentle rolling drift of something at the mercy of larger forces. "Are we going to be okay?" Sev said, and the directness of it, the absolute uncurated directness of a frightened child asking the only question that mattered is, based on Dr. West's account, the moment that something changed in the room. The other children had gone quiet. They were listening. Even the ones who had been crying had gone quiet. Mara Oduya was quiet for 3 seconds. I have thought about those 3 seconds many times since Dr. West described them to me. I have thought about what it means to be a person in that position, inside a drifting vessel, inside a gas giant, with less than 20 minutes before the atmospheric pressure becomes incompatible with hull integrity, with a child beside you asking the direct question, and with the knowledge that the truthful answer is maybe. She did not say maybe, she said. I flew into this planet's atmosphere to come get you. I'm not leaving without you. A pause. That's not a thing I would do if I wasn't pretty sure about the outcome. Sev processed this for a moment. The amber eyes were steady. Pretty sure, Sev said. Aviation's a confidence business, Mara said. You learn to round up. Dr. West told me that Sev, very slowly, let go of the equipment bag strap. Mara was on her feet in the next breath, moving toward the propulsion relay compartment, and she was running. She had 8 minutes left of her 12. I want to say something here, as a professional who has filed more incident reports than meals. In those reports, I have described emergencies with the language of systems. Propulsion relay, secondary bus, thruster authority. These are the words that make events manageable, that reduce the terrifying complexity of what is happening to a sequence of describable steps. What Mara Oduya did in the Orindal's propulsion relay compartment in the next 7 minutes and 40 seconds was not reducible to those words. The engineering team who inspected the Orindal afterward said that the manual bypass she had performed was not a procedure in any existing maintenance manual for Preth academic vessels. It was, the lead engineer told me, something someone had invented on the spot, using components that were available, guided by an understanding of how electrical systems fail that was, and I am quoting, either very sophisticated or completely intuitive, and we cannot determine which. I can tell you which. It was both. I think with humans, it is always both. The Orindal secondary thruster bus came online at 14 minutes and 22 seconds after Mara had entered the vessel. She had told me she would be back in 12. She was 2 minutes and 22 seconds late, which I had spent in a state I will not describe in detail, except to say that Len Yu had at some point brought me something to drink, and I had not noticed. Oduya, I said, when the thruster telemetry changed on my screen. Yeah, she said, slightly breathless, already moving. Got it. Partial authority, about 40%, but combined with my thrust it should be enough, getting back to the Sonda now. You are 11 minutes from crush layer entry. I know. Your combined thrust output at current drive stress may not be sufficient to clear the gravitational gradient in 11 minutes. I know, Veth. Not impatient, still that specific calm. I'm going to use the Sonder's entry angle and the Orindal's partial thrusters to catch the counter-rotation band again on the way out. Same principle, different direction, like a slingshot. Going to need about 90 seconds of precise timing at a depth where the currents are going to be fighting us. I ran the calculation while she was still talking. The margin was not comfortable. The margin was, by any reasonable engineering standard, extremely thin. The kind of margin that exists on paper and does not always survive contact with actual atmospheric physics. Ms. Oduya, I said carefully, the calculated probability of successful trajectory correction under those conditions is approximately... I looked at the number Len Yu had just put on my screen. 61%. A pause. Yeah, she said. I'm going to need you to not tell me that again. I'm busy. 8 minutes and 40 seconds to crush layer entry. She was back aboard the Sonda. The drives came to full emergency thrust. The combined mass of both vessels, linked by the hard dock, began to move against Velnarath's patient, enormous gravity. 6 minutes. The current shears at this depth were significant. I watched her correction vectors on my display, and I want to tell you that they looked like something planned. Something calculated, the output of a navigation system working at full capacity. They did not. They looked like instinct. They looked like a body that had learned to read the atmosphere the way other bodies learn to read a room, a face, a voice. She was not calculating. She was feeling. 4 minutes. "There," she said quietly, to nobody, or to Patch, or to Velnarath itself. "There you are." She had found the counter-rotation band. The combined vessels hit it at an angle that made my structural stress calculations produce numbers I did not want to look at directly. They did not break apart. The band caught them. The velocity vector shifted. The trajectory on my display changed degree by degree, pulling away from the crush layer boundary with the slow, grinding determination of something that has decided it is not done yet. 2 minutes. The boundary margin was increasing. 1 minute, still increasing. Len Wu was standing. I did not remember him standing up. His crest was the full, brilliant gold white of a Kethi in a state that does not have a single clean translation in most languages, but which encompasses awe and relief, and a kind of terror at how close it had been, and something underneath all of that which is closest in my understanding to the word grace. The combined vessels cleared the crush layer boundary with 4 minutes and 7 seconds to spare. The next several minutes, if I am honest, are somewhat disorganized in my memory, which is not something I am accustomed to saying. I am accustomed to precise recall. I have trained it in myself over 27 years because in this work, recall is a professional obligation. But I remember the channel erupting. Every vessel in the system that had been monitoring the emergency frequency, the Kurd Stormbreaker, still 40 minutes out, whose captain said something in Kethi that I will not repeat here but which expressed the general sentiment accurately. The Preth diplomatic courier, which had been maintaining a communication silence that now broke into a formal request for status verification, which I ignored with great personal satisfaction. I remember Len Wu sitting down very suddenly and then staring at his own hands for a long moment. I remember the moment I realized I had been holding the edge of my console with all 4 of my upper limbs since the 4-minute mark, and that my scale plating had gone a color that I was going to have to explain to my physician. And I remember the channel clearing eventually, and Mara Oduya's voice coming back, quieter now, the particular quiet of after. "Veth," she said, "I've got 46 aboard, all accounted for. No serious injuries. The Arindal is going to need a full systems overhaul. I've got partial drive control, enough to get us to the nearest station with a Preth medical bay. I'll need a traffic clearance for docking priority." Professional, procedural, as if she were filing a standard approach request. "Clearance granted," I said, and I meant all of it, every part of what that word was capable of meaning. "All corridors clear, priority approach, welcome back, Ms. Oduya." A short sound, almost a laugh. "Mara," she said, "it's just Mara." Within hours, the news had spread to every station and relay in the system. Within the day, the Preth Academic Authority had issued a formal statement, which was notable because the Preth Academic Authority had never in its history issued a formal statement about an individual from another species. Within the week, the incident had been reviewed by 3 separate committees, which is what happens when something occurs that does not fit cleanly into any existing administrative category. I was contacted by the Kethi Fleet Admiralty. I was contacted by the Preth Diplomatic Bureau, who this time responded quickly and without reference to Clause 7, subsection 4b. I was contacted by a journalist from the Galactic Press Consortium who wanted a comment, and by a navigation training institute on 4 different worlds who wanted access to the telemetry data. I gave the data to the training institutes. I gave the journalist a very brief comment. I gave the Preth Diplomatic Bureau a full incident report, and then I walked away from my console for the first time in 19 hours, and I stood at the observation window of the Traffic Authority station, and I looked at Velnarath, and I thought about what I had watched happen. The formal ceremony was held at Station Velnarath 7, 12 days after the incident. The Preth Academic Authority presented their highest civilian recognition, the Seal of Continued Inquiry, to Mara Oduya. It had never been given to a non-Preth before. The ceremony was brief because the Preth prefer efficiency in their public functions. But within that efficiency, there was something that I, who have attended many formal ceremonies and been moved by very few of them, found genuinely affecting. Coordinator Des, who had been the vessel master of the Orindal and who had been unconscious for most of the emergency due to a head injury sustained in the initial system failure, stood very straight and presented the seal and said, in the careful, measured way of her people, "You came for our children when no one else would. The Preth do not forget." Mara Oduya accepted the seal with both hands, which is the correct Preth gesture for receiving an honor, which she had clearly looked up beforehand. She said, "The kids were great, especially the one who told me my suit had been repaired in 4 visible places, because that was absolutely fair, and I appreciated the feedback." There was a sound from the assembled Preth that took me a moment to identify as laughter. In the front row, a small Preth child with large amber eyes watched Mara Oduya with an expression that I recognized because Dr. Wes had described it to me. Not yet hope. Something that had graduated from the neighborhood of hope into the thing itself. Sev was going to be an atmospheric scientist. I knew this with a certainty I could not have explained. Some things you simply know. I realized something in the weeks after the ceremony that has kept me awake on a number of nights since, and I am not a creature who loses sleep easily. I had been a traffic overseer for 27 years. I had watched 10,000 vessels move through corridors I managed. I had built a professional understanding of what was possible, of what the limits were, of what the numbers meant. What I realized, lying awake in the quiet of my quarters with Velnorath's ambient light coming through the port, was that I had been doing something that I had not recognized as a choice because it felt like expertise. I had been deciding, based on experience and data and the reliable history of how things go, what was possible. Mara Oduya had looked at the same data and not done that. Not because she was reckless, not because she did not understand the numbers. The 3 citations in her file were not ignorance. The modifications to her vessel were not carelessness. She had understood exactly what the numbers said, and she had also understood something that the numbers did not say, which was that the numbers did not know her. The numbers did not know that she had grown up in a gas giant's embrace. The numbers did not know that she had 6 years of Velnorath specifically written into her hands, and her reflexes, and her understanding of how a particular atmosphere felt on a particular day. The numbers did not know that she would look at an atmospheric current map and see a road. I had given her the data, and the data had said 61% probability of success. She had taken the data, and she had turned it into certainty. Not by ignoring it, by adding herself to the equation. How do you account for that? How do you build a safety protocol around that? How do you train a junior overseer to recognize it when it comes through on an emergency frequency in a casual voice asking for coordinates? I do not have answers to these questions. I have spent considerable time with them, and I have not arrived at answers. I suspect the questions are the point. I saw her once more, about 6 weeks after the ceremony. She was passing through my corridor on a standard calibration contract, Velnorath approach, atmospheric entry scheduled for the next morning. She filed her approach documentation correctly, which I noted with genuine appreciation. I opened a direct channel, not protocol, informal. "Oduya," I said. "Safe entry." A brief pause. Warm, somehow, just a pause. "Thanks, Veth," she said. "She's in a good mood today. Should be smooth." She was talking about Velnorath. The channel closed. The Sonder's beacon moved toward its standard approach corridor, and I watched it for a moment longer than the work required. And then I returned to my other traffic, because there was always other traffic, and that is what I do. Junior Overseer Len Yu asked me once, some weeks after everything, What I thought about the humans. He is a thoughtful young officer, Len Yu. He will be good at this work in time. He asks the right questions, which is the most important quality, in my experience, for someone who sits behind a console and watches the galaxy move and has to make decisions about what any given situation requires. I told him that I had revised my assessment. He asked what I meant. I told him that I had spent 27 years forming a professional opinion of what the various species who passed through my corridors were capable of, what they would do and would not do, where the edges of their capability were, and how to account for those edges in my planning. I had done this for the Kethi and the Preth and every species in between. I had done it well. It had served me. I had done it for humans too. I told Len Yu that I had been, in the case of humans, measuring the wrong thing. He thought about this for a while in the careful way he has. "What should we be measuring?" he asked. I watched the traffic on my screen, 11 vessels in my corridor, standard operations, smooth and managed and entirely under control. "That," I said, "is exactly the question." 46 souls came home from Velnarath that day. One small human who had been listening to music on the way down and who called her ship Patch and who rounded her confidence up because aviation is a confidence business. The galaxy gave her a medal. She gave the credit to a child who knew what ammonium hydrosulfide clouds were and was not afraid to say so, and to a ship that knew how Velnarath felt when she was just bored. She was back on contract inside that same gas giant within the month. She filed her approach documentation on time, every time, which I appreciated professionally and found, in the new context of what I knew about her, faintly absurd. I have added a note to her registration file. It is not standard procedure. It is not anything I was asked to do. It is simply a note. For any overseer who pulls her documentation and looks at the 3 citations for unlicensed velocity exceedance and forms the same professional assessment I had formed. The note says, "Pay attention." The rest, I decided, they would have to learn on their own. That is perhaps true of the whole species. We had spent 90 years watching them move through our corridors and our stations and our carefully maintained administrative frameworks, and we had been measuring them against the documentation, against the regulations, against the filed forms and the rated limits and the probability calculations. We had been looking at what the numbers said they were. We had not been paying attention to what they did when the numbers ran out. We had welcomed them into the galactic community with assessments and certifications and 3 prior citations and the quiet, experienced confidence of people who have seen everything. We had not understood what we were welcoming. We had called them manageable. We had called them unremarkable. We had called them, in the polite procedural language of incident reports and traffic advisories and administrative correspondence, within acceptable parameters. We had opened our corridors to wolves and spent 90 years filing paperwork about sheep. End.